Hey, this is Dan Harris, and welcome to the Ironbird Podcast. On today's episode, we have David Bilson. David is the owner and president of TransExec Private Jets. On today's podcast, we dive in deep into aircraft safety. David himself has transacted over 40 airplanes, so he really provides some insights on what to look for when buying and selling airplanes, and then how to compare charter, fractional programs like his own Gulfstream program for chartering airplanes. I really enjoyed it. I hope you do too. Thanks. All right, David, real quick, let's start by discussing operating airplanes and how someone can operate an airplane not at a loss.
Impossible. Next question.
That's what everyone says, right?
Yeah, no, seriously, it's what everybody says. And I suppose at some level I'm a contradiction because that's exactly what I've done. There's a couple of parts to it.
Okay.
First of all, some amount of patience. I didn't start with a fleet of heavy Gulfstreams. That's not where I started.
Yeah.
You know, I started with one helicopter and one little single engine airplane and started building and building up the equity in those airplanes. And now I own a large fleet of Gulfstreams without any debt on them, which is one of the factors.
Yep.
I think another factor is focus. A lot of times I think people in all walks of business lose focus on what you are, what you do.
Yeah.
And they start allowing sometimes the clients or other pressures, maybe investors say, oh, well, hey, we had somebody ask for a small jet. We should get some small jets. And somebody wanted a helicopter flight a few times. Let's get a helicopter. Instead of saying, this is who we are. And more importantly, this is who we're not.
Yeah. Try not to be everything for everybody, right?
Try not to be everything for everybody and keep focused on something. There was a lot of times in my career, which is over 40 years now, where there was these things that came up, including fractional ownership and different things where I thought, oh, geez, are we doing the wrong thing? And we stuck to who we were and it paid off well.
Yeah.
I do believe for myself, at least, in not taking in any investor money or any investors so that there's just less mouths to feed, which helps to get these planets to line up right to make money in aviation. And the last part is the rates. The rates for airplanes are historically too low. If you look at charter rates prior to, let's say, 2019, there was probably a 20-year span where the prices were flat.
Yeah.
They didn't go up a bit. And pilots went from making $60,000 a year to $260,000 a year. A windshield that was $7,000 was now $70,000, but the rate was the same.
Yeah.
So I believe that most people that rent aircraft understand, my Bentley that I bought, now I buy a new one 5 years later, I'm not expecting it to be the same price, right? Yeah. So it is important that to make all these stars line up, the planets line up. I think you have to look at each individual thing and make sure it makes sense, and pricing is certainly one of those as well.
Yeah. And wanted you explain to us how you started in the industry, 40 years ago. You mentioned with a helicopter?
Yeah. So I was just a kid who lived near the airport. And I used to walk down to the airport. I was 12 years old. I walked down to the airport and forged my mom's signature that I could take a ride on a plane and wash somebody's airplane so that I could go for a ride.
Yep.
Started taking lessons. My first logged flight lesson was at 12 years old. And I was just passionate. I loved airplanes.
Yeah.
When I was about 16 years old, and on my 16th birthday, I soloed in helicopters and airplanes on my birthday and got my driver's license. It was a good day. And I went to my father, who owned hospitals around the world, and I said, you know what? I want to make my hobby my career. And he's very loving. He put his arm around me. He said, son, you probably won't make a lot of dough, but you're going to have a great life and more power to you. So where this has gone has sort of been beyond what I expected, but I started as a pilot. Yeah.
And then how did you make that decision to go? You want to bring us through how do you get from a helicopter to maybe a single engine to a jet to how do you end up at having a fleet of Gulfstreams?
I really was guided by passion. I didn't have anything to lose. For 2 years in the beginning of opening the company, I literally slept on the office floor and used to shower at the gym. I put everything into this. And I was passionate. And I wanted to fly cool airplanes. I wanted to fly bigger airplanes. I wanted to fly cooler helicopters. And so in the beginning, it wasn't a lot of methodical logic. It wasn't pragmatic. It was, oh, that's cool. Let's go do that.
Yeah.
And then I started honing it down as, as I got more resources and things started to change to what I thought made sense for the clients, watching what drove them and what was the best product for them.
What was like your first big purchase that you might have been like, holy shit, I'm in deep?
The first biggest purchase, which is what really made me create the program that we have now, was a G2. And that was in 1991. At the time, the G2 was like what a G4, G5 would be today. And I realized that a few months of no income could just put me out.
Yeah.
And charter's unreliable. And that's a different story of how I started the priority program that we have.
Yep. And then, so how many Gulfstream model types have you owned?
G2, G3, G4, G4SP, G5, G550.
You probably don't count this, but how many airplane transactions do you think you've done over that time?
Gosh. I think when I looked at it, we average about one purchase every year.
Okay. So over 40 maybe transactions that you've probably done?
Yes, definitely.
When you are, maybe for other people that are looking to buy or sell airplanes, either for themselves or for a company, what are some of the things that you look at when you're analyzing maybe the market or even a specific airplane? What are the things that you're looking at? Hey, is this a good airplane purchase? Is this a good airplane? Or is this the right or wrong time to make purchases?
Got it. It's, unfortunately, there's a real problem with trying to time the market, which is, it doesn't matter what industry. And if you're in the trucking industry and all of a sudden there's a lot of trucking happening, you need trucks. And that's, by the way, when the trucks are going to be the most expensive. So I don't really try to time the market. I do look for deals. And for me, a deal is finding an airplane that has amazing pedigree, that was operated the way that we would operate the airplane and had impeccable maintenance. That you could make a terrible airplane a good airplane, but it costs millions and millions of dollars of replacing all the parts. An airplane is just a bunch of parts. And if you could replace your nose one year and your eye and your brain and your spine and everything, eventually you're a new person. And so airplanes can be rehabbed, but for us, we really like to look at airplanes that have a good pedigree on them. And usually that's a Part 91 corporate operation.
And then are you taking and remodeling airplanes yourself? How are you then, from a purchase, how do you make them a TransExec airplane?
Got it. Well, first we have a specific layout that we've honed down over years, literally to, it has to be forward galley because the airflow in a Gulfstream, as most jets, is from back to front.
Interesting.
And you don't want the food smells going from the back to the front. Secondly, with the forward galley, you separate, there's a wall that separates the client on one side and the crew on the other side. So they can close off the door and nobody has to go back to the galley. Also, the way that we have the seats lined up and where the conference group is the most amount of walking straight through the cabin before you make one turn rather than having two turns. There's a lot of little details to it. We also like to have the woodwork all be perfect. So we always redo all the woodwork in the airplane when we get it. And of course, the soft goods, the carpet, the seats, just to start to make everything look not every airplane's identical, but they all have the same layout, the same basic color palette.
And that helps you, and maybe it goes to a question of why Gulfstream? Why all heavy jets or why all Gulfstream?
Because they're cool.
Listen, I've always said this. I'm a big Gulfstream guy. My first coast to coast flight was an empty leg on a Gulfstream 550.
Nice.
And the first large charters I've ever sold were on Gulfstreams. Nothing against Bombardier or Globals, but I've always been a big proponent of Gulfstreams myself. I've had a good history with Gulfstream.
There's a lot of great products out there, I'll say, to be politically correct. The Gulfstream, the original decision was years ago when I was buying my first large heavy jet. And I was talking to people that operated other, like the Challenger and other airplanes. And I noticed that the people I knew that had Gulfstreams, they'd go around the world with the thing, come back, there'd be a light bulb out. And with some of these other manufacturers, they'd be grounded here, grounded there, grounded here, grounded there. And I could give you a ton of specific examples. But for me, it was about reliability. The Gulfstream is built sort of like an American muscle car. It's overbuilt. It's thick metal. It's got big engines, and it's solid. It gets up above the weather. It has a lot of redundancy to it, and doesn't break often.
Yep.
So for me as an operator, the killer, as I'm sure you know, is missed trips, downtime. We've never missed a trip on one of these airplanes in the history of flying these airplanes. We've made every single trip, and they're just good and reliable aircraft.
It's funny. I just had an issue on a trip where I had an airplane that was a Brazilian manufactured airplane, and it needed a simple part, not that hard to fix, but part got held up in customs, and it was like, oh, one more day, because is it going to get released? Going to get released, and never did, and we had to replace the airplane to another airplane similar size.
Wow.
But it ended up, we ended up taking a loss on the flight. We didn't pass it on to the client, but having that, do you think also having logistically a U.S. based airplane manufacturer is also another advantage of Gulfstream's?
It is, and it is for the reason that you said. It's not to wave an American flag around.
Yeah.
It is easier. It is easier to get parts. It's easier to get a hold of people. I think there's good support now with the other manufacturers. They've done a good job of getting a U.S. base of parts and so forth.
Yeah.
But Gulfstream's always been really easy. They have something called their fast team, where they actually have their own airplane and they just fly out to you if there's something where you're going to be grounded.
Yeah.
So the support is great, and again, the product is just solid.
I think I've seen that airplane before. It used to be a G150. I don't know if they've changed it into something bigger before, but I remember I saw the G150 fast airplane, and it's pretty incredible that they've got airplanes dedicated to just moving parts around. I mean, that's how serious they are about support.
Absolutely. All my mechanics have asked me when I'm going to get them an airplane to travel around. So,
well, technically, at least you have one airplane that's not a Gulfstream, right?
Oh, we do. I have a Citation, but that's mostly for not for people.
It's almost like for your fast airplane. Have you ever put a part in your Citation if you ever needed to?
I never have, but I've certainly flown my family on a lot of ski trips.
Yeah, that's nice. Yeah, because a little bit different operating costs. When we think about, again, purchasing airplanes and budgeting, how do you look at depreciation when you are purchasing those airplanes, and how does it come into play of just overall budgeting and profitability?
Great question. When I started doing this, I realized that I don't have a crystal ball, and I don't want to try. So what I decided to do was to take a line to depreciate the aircraft in my mind, or on a budget, down to zero.
Yep.
And anything at the end of using it that I could sell it above zero is great. It's just icing on the cake. But these are depreciating assets.
Yep.
There's been a couple of times in history where there's been these little bumps where it's leveled off or actually gone up.
Yep.
But they are depreciating assets, and they do depreciate rapidly. I think more so now than in the past. If you look at how quickly manufacturers are coming out with new models now, it's very different. They used to run them for 20, 30 years, they'd have a model, and now they keep coming out with new models, and that just makes the depreciation curve a little steeper.
Yeah. How does that affect the new models? How does that curve then affect maybe used airplane pricing? Does that have an effect on that as well?
It does. Anytime, more aircraft of any model are put out into the market, it floods the market, and then the used airplane prices come down. They get buoyed up a little bit artificially because wealthy people don't have to sell.
Yeah.
Like the housing market, people can't make their rent next month or whatever, their mortgage, boom, it goes down.
Yeah.
This, people can say, I'm not going to sell my airplane for that. It's worth this. And they can sort of keep saying that for a while until they get kind of tenderized like a piece of meat.
Get it off the books.
And they're like, you know what, get that thing out of there. Because it costs a lot of money just to have it sitting on your ramp, as you know.
Yeah.
So yes, I do think the market, because of the G700 coming out now, I think a big percentage of those initial 50 airplanes that are going to be delivered were people that owned 650s and other airplanes. So that has to affect the market.
Does that affect like when you're making buying decisions, or you're saying, all right, it's time to move different upgrades or upgrade airplanes? I know you can't time the market, but is that something you're like, oh, maybe this is a better time to purchase an airplane or upgrade an airplane, or maybe even sell an airplane?
Sure. Yeah, I will do it opportunistically. I don't plan for it, but if all of a sudden the market went down 60%, I'd say, oh, we should probably buy 3 airplanes this year.
Yeah.
So yeah, I'll do that reactively.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. What are some of the airplanes that, as your fleet changes, what airplanes are you moving into now?
You know, it's interesting when we decide which airplanes to go into. It's a lot of that goes back to the clients, talking to them about what they want or what they need, or if we got this, would you use this?
Yeah.
And it seems that the sweet spot is the G550. When I've talked to those clients, the ones that are using it, I've got clients that use that 500-600 hours a year. I said, hey, what would you think about a 650 or a 600? And they've looked at me like, well, why?
Yeah. The 550 does everything.
This is doing everything we need.
Yeah.
And even when you look out at the ramp with all these new airplanes coming out, what's doing most of the charter out there? It's still G4s.
Yep. Yeah.
My office is almost like a control tower. It looks out on the ramp, and I see the airplanes that are coming and going, business flights, charter flights. It's a ton of these G4s because what did it do? It's a stand-up, walk-around flight attendant airplane.
Yep.
Goes 9 hours, so most places that you go in a G550, you can go in the G4. And it just kind of hit a sweet spot, and it's hard to replace that.
Yeah. When you're looking at operating these airplanes, if the G4 or the 5 or the 550, how are you looking at safety and managing? Like, what are your thoughts around operating an airplane as safe as possible?
You know, because I came from being a pilot, so I'm a pilot, I'm an owner of aircraft, I'm an operator of aircraft, I'm a customer of aircraft, I fly my family around this way. I see the different sides of it, and I've thought a lot about what creates safety. When you take it at the pilot's perspective, what creates safety is prioritization.
Yep.
Very simple. It's what's important, what's not. And you're constantly making those decisions. It's not regulations that create safety, although, you know, I always say you go by the regulations because they're there for a reason, and we don't want to end up in jail or lose our businesses. That's what regulations are about. But safety goes above the regulations. It's on top. That's just maybe a foundation, if you will. I'm embarrassed to say I have a few failed relationships in my life. I'm with the love of my life now and have a beautiful little 1-year-old baby daughter. But what I realized is it's sort of the same thing when you're picking pilots. You can have the wrong partner, and you can go to as much therapy as you want. You can work on things. You can have house rules. It ain't going to work. Yeah. But if you pick the right person, you can go through a lot of stuff, and it's going to work. You've got that team. You've got that you're all kind of rowing in the same direction. So when we look at safety, a lot of it comes down to the pilot. We can have all the processes and procedures in the world, the best maintenance and everything we have, but that pilot who's sitting in the pointy end of that airplane, he has to be the right guy or lady. And we do a lot of looking at personality when we hire pilots. You know, how's this person going to be? How's it going to be in a situation where safety gets on his shoulders?
Yeah.
One of the problems is airplanes are too reliable. That really, I know that's a weird thing to say about safety.
It's an interesting way to put it.
But in the old days,
they cover for a lot of mistakes.
Well, in the 1940s, every time you took off was an emergency. So those pilots, I mean, they were amazing. They, you know, an engine catches on fire and bullets are going through. They're like having a cup of coffee, like no problem getting it. Now, pilots probably don't see emergencies. And you don't know how somebody's going to react in a burning house until they're in a burning house, no matter how much training there is and anything else. So you really have to look deeply into that. And I'm fortunate as a over 16,000 hour pilot who's had emergencies that I can fly with these people and give my own assessment of how they're going to be in those situations.
And then is that when you're hiring pilots, how can you tell from a pilot, like, hey, I feel like this guy has the priorities, he lines up with what we're looking for in a pilot, and what are some things you say, no, doesn't look like a good fit?
Well, I have a few questions that I use. I like to ask the pilots straight up, first of all, are you a safe pilot? They'll always say yes. Say, great, what creates safety? And the ones that talk about decision-making, prioritization, how they work with the team in the cockpit, how they assess a situation.
Mm-hmm.
Those are the ones when you can tell they've deeply thought about it, it's ingrained in their DNA, then I can tell they're probably going to be a pretty safe pilot.
What are your thoughts, speaking of pilots, of when people own airplanes and put them either in a management company or looking at purchasing a program and they're trying to consider safety? What are your thoughts on pooling pilots versus, having 2 or 3 dedicated pilots to one specific airplane?
I think you should always let your pilots swim if they want to.
Mm-hmm.
That what you meant by pooling?
Kind of, yes.
No, okay.
Yeah.
I jest.
Yeah.
I think that, and there's been statistics that support this. When you have 2 pilots that fly with each other, and I understand why somebody buying an airplane says, I want my pilot.
They want to see the same 2 people. Yeah.
I get it. I get it. And a lot of my program talks about that. I use the analogy in my program about, if you're going to take your wife to 3 surgical procedures in a row, do you want 3 different surgeons?
Yeah.
You're not going to do that, but you'll hop on one of these Uber type charter companies and get a different pilot every time.
Yeah.
I do think it's good to have a small closed group. Mm-hmm. But when you rotate the pilots, you get rid of one of the largest problems, I think, in aviation that creates unsafe environments, which is complacency. Mm-hmm. And when 2 people fly with each other a lot, they start to get a little bit casual about
He'll
checklists.
Do this,
and,
I'll do this.
They're chatting about how's Mary.
Yeah.
And mixing it up a little bit, it's sort of like, I don't know, having the same trainer in the gym for too long. You want to actually have another person, so you have those checks and balances be fresh.
Yeah. That's really interesting. I haven't heard a take like that, but that makes a lot of sense.
The other side that we find is that if it's within one, let's say, management company, we don't manage airplanes, but if it's in one management company, you might have one crew that's flying 28 days a month, sitting in the lobby next to another crew with the same company flying 5 days a month.
Yeah.
And there can be a lot of inequality. When you can rotate the crews, everybody can fly the same amount. If everybody's busy, it goes up, it goes down together. You can give people a little bit better quality of life.
That's really interesting. What about pilot pay? Do you think it's going to continue to go up? Is it just going to make it, where does it continue to go?
Remember, I'm a pilot.
Yeah.
So
I
think we should pay me a lot.
Yeah.
Pay is interesting. So when I interview people, it tends to get sucked down to the same 2 questions. What's the pay? What's the time off?
Yeah. Yeah.
Let me approach those 2 separately. Pay is an interesting one. So I'm in a group called YPO, a business group, and I was meeting with, these are entrepreneurs, very successful people. And I was sitting with a group of them, and just for fun, I said, let me ask you guys all a question. If you could choose one, would you pick money or happiness? They all answered
happiness.
Obviously the same thing, right? Then I said to them a difficult question. I said, do you live your life that way every day?
No. Yeah. No.
None of them were.
Yeah.
It's a
drive
sobering
yourself
question.
crazy for money. Yeah.
Sobering question, right?
Yeah.
If you watch these films they do about some of the old wealth, the Carnegies and some of these people, one thing across the board is their kids will say, I never knew my dad.
Yeah.
They were terrible. Their wives say they were terrible husbands. So I think that the same thing occurs when you look at taking a job, which is, money is a thing. But when you get up where all the money's good,
Yep.
What are you really looking at? And I tell people when I interview them, I say, look, you don't have to be aligned with my philosophies, but you do if you want to work here. And the point is that a lot of people don't look at that. When you go work somewhere, you should look at the ethos of that company. Look at the owner of the company.
Yeah.
Do you like this person? Because what do we spend, like 70% of our awake life at work?
Yeah. Yeah.
We always put a lot of effort into the vacations and thinking about those, but what about that? And so when people talk about quality of life, I think they focus on the wrong things. Find a company where you feel a part of something that you believe in. And so I think with pay, that needs to be a little bit more of the focus. I think pay has increased. I can look in the airlines where there's some crazy numbers that I've heard. That's out of desperation. It's not sustainable. So I think there's going to be an up and a down on that, obviously.
Yeah.
And I think the pilots in the airlines, I don't know much about it, have kind of capitalized off of that problem that exists. But I think that the pay for pilots should be commensurate with the responsibility they have. They do have the safety of a bunch of people in the back of an airplane on their shoulders.
Yeah.
And I think it should be commensurate with that. And we pay very well. The second part of that, time off, is an interesting one. I know why I became a pilot. Now, do I take time off? Absolutely.
Yeah.
I don't fly 28 days a month like I used to. I have a family. There's things I want to do. But people will look at how many days off without looking necessarily at what the days on look like. And I've talked to pilots that have been lured in by this, it's 2 weeks on, 2 weeks off.
Yeah.
Great. I don't know who in the rest of the world gets a 2-week vacation 12 times a month, but more power to you.
Yeah.
But they ultimately said those 2 weeks were so awful and not what I love about flying. It was banging around 3 legs a day and different passengers all the time.
Yeah.
If you ask a pilot, what is the best, what is the dream job? They'll always say a Part 91 job, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Say, great, what is that schedule? Well, you don't really have a lot of hard days off, right? Because there's
But you're always on call.
You're kind of always on call, but you have good, you know when trips are coming up, right?
Yep.
There's not really pop-ups. And you fly somewhere with the same people.
Yep.
You sit in wherever the south of France for 5 days and you fly back. This is more what our schedule is like. And that, I think, is something that, again, doesn't get focused on when you distill it down to just what's the pay, how many days off.
Yeah.
There's so much nuance in that. And look, some people don't care. And I wonder why sometimes people become or stay as being pilots if they get to the point where I want to figure out how never to fly.
Yep.
I've actually, and I'll tell you a little secret, I don't know if anybody out there listening is going to interview with me with this question. I had a pilot that I was a little concerned about one time, and I said, hey, I've got this special deal. I've got a government contract where we just need to be on standby, but they literally have never used us in 10 years. But I need a name. So I can pay you the full salary, but you don't ever have to come in or fly the airplane. Would you take that job? Pilot said, absolutely. And I knew that wasn't my guy.
Yeah.
My guy is the guy that's passionate about flying.
Yeah.
I have pilots that on their days off, they come just to hang out at the airport and be around the airplanes. And passion about flying makes better aviators.
Well, I know the way you've set up the company, you've got people that have worked for you for a long time. What do you, how many pilots do you have that have been with you for years and years and years?
I've got a handful of pilots that have been with me for over 15 years, a couple over 20. I have pilots that started as a young 25-year-old co-pilot in a citation and now are G550 international captains.
Yeah.
And, at around 50 years old, and I say this with no conceit or arrogance, I realized that I really didn't have to work anymore. And when I did go back to work the next day, it changed my perspective on everything, which is I want to enjoy these people.
Yeah.
I want to work with people that I want to think that I'm creating an environment where they go home saying, well, that was a great day. That was a wonderful place to be. And so we've got a good camaraderie. We always say we work hard, we play hard. And we're very friendly with each other. We all focus on safety, but we do it as a team. We have meetings where everybody comes up with ideas, and we have these kind of retreats to talk about how we can best run the company. I'll ask each one of my pilots, what color do you think we should paint the airplanes next year? I want everybody involved in every facet of it. There's no secrets. If I'm thinking about buying an airplane or doing something, if there's a client we're talking to, everybody knows about it.
Do you think that provides a better level of service when your pilots feel like they're involved in the company?
Absolutely. I think that anytime a person believes in the product, they're going to, quote, sell it better.
Yeah.
And our pilots are passionate about the trips. When we do a trip, and part of this is due to our size. And trust me, if I had 600 airplanes like at some of these other companies, I couldn't do this.
Yeah.
But we'll be talking. I'll be talking to my chief pilot and my head of dispatch and the lead flight attendant about one flight that's going out. We're chatting about like right now. I could tell you every airplane I've got in the air and probably what the client's eating.
Yep.
So we're all passionate about the end product, and by everybody leaning in the same direction, it just kind of works.
Yeah. It's interesting. You made a point about pilots and the way they compare jobs, and I think I'm going to correlate that to how people, look at buying, charter and programs, where some pilots just say, salary, days on, days off. And I think some clients look at, what's the airplane, what's the hourly rate, what's it going to cost, and I've seen a lot of different admins and people basically have, can you fill the spreadsheet out and tell me what it costs to fly to these 4 or 5 destinations? What do you and I think there's a lot missing when you're just looking at airplane and price.
Absolutely.
What do you think for people that are maybe looking into programs? How would you suggest someone analyze, what might be the right program for them as a client, a charter or airplane flyer?
I think nobody wants to be ripped off. And I think that there is a point at which it becomes exorbitant, some of the differences.
And there is a surprising amount of companies that are not fake, but are sell a false set of goods and we've seen plenty of companies take in large sums of money and go bankrupt, unfortunately. So I agree with you. I would love to tell people there's no way you're going to get ripped off, but there's definitely that chance, right?
Absolutely. Yeah. I think you look at the stability of the company. You are putting money there, obviously. You want to make sure the money's safe.
Yeah.
But also, let's be real. This is a ridiculous amount of money to fly this way. Okay? So I think once you accept that, do you want to spend a little more to make it a ridiculously amazing experience, or spend a ridiculous amount of money and be disappointed?
Yeah.
So you can spend $1 million a year and be pissed off all the time, and the coffee maker didn't work, and this, and I didn't have what I want on board. It's a different crew every time. Or do you want to spend 1.1 and have it be an incredible experience and meet all the expectations?
Yeah.
So I think that you need to look at the quantitative stuff, but also the qualitative. Look at the company's safety record. For us, we're proud of how few hours we fly our airplanes every month. Our airplanes fly between 35 and 40 hours a month. Most of my peers will brag, we put 120 hours on our airplane.
Yeah.
That's tough.
Yeah.
Our airplane lands, it probably doesn't fly for a few days. It's being meticulously maintained, white glove. Have our own interior person who's doing the wood polishing and somebody who's doing the exterior. Everybody works for us full time, just making these airplanes perfect, because we respect when somebody's spending this amount of money. I don't care if you're going to Vegas or if you're going to Paris, it's a large sum.
Yep.
And we want to exceed their expectations every day and make it really special. That airplane at that price should be better food than the best restaurant in LA or New York. It should be better bedding and pillows than the finest hotel in Paris. And that's, look what they're paying. They're sometimes paying the price of a small house to get to Paris.
Yeah. Yeah. The food and catering is a thing I've been very outspoken about how terrible most aviation catering is.
Well, we don't use caterers.
Yep.
It's a company policy.
Why is that?
Well, no offense to the caterers, because,
that's okay.
because they do something that's very difficult to do.
Yes.
24/7 be able to provide food, and their food's good.
Most of the time.
Their food's good. But for us, again, people are in our program, and we're trying to not be a commodity. Once you're a commodity, then it's just price.
Yep.
We are the only company that I know of that has our own private chef. We source it's not to be fancy. It could be a pastrami sandwich, but it's going to be the best bread, the freshest bread, the best meats.
Yep.
And it's people are very health conscious now. So we do a lot of, our flight attendants are trained on some gourmet cooking techniques. They're trained on gourmet plating techniques. We have 4 different types of milk for their cappuccino for the clients.
Yep.
And so food is such an important part of the flight because it breaks it up. When you go on the airlines, there's 2 events, right? You watch a movie.
Yep.
And there's the food.
Yeah.
Otherwise, you're sitting in a seat staring forward like, okay, this is awesome. So that's what we try to focus on our flights is what do we do to make this time valuable? We've had clients say to us, and I did not coin this phrase, with you, the flight became part of the vacation, not an adjunct to it.
Yep. Yeah. Anytime I fly to Boston, it's like, one movie down. It's like, oh man, I still have 2 more movies sitting in this chair and getting to Boston in a 6-hour flight. So to kind of go back to how people analyze providers and programs, what are maybe actually a good place to start is, can you explain to us your program, how it works, and then maybe who do you think is a great fit for your program?
Sure. So we started as a regular charter company. Wealthy people owned airplanes. We ran those airplanes for them, and then we chartered them out and made a profit on that when they weren't using it. I realized after a while that to have the quality that I wanted, I needed to own the airplanes. I couldn't have this guy who didn't want to do his interior, but every 10 years, this guy would do it every 2 years. And they're all over the place. And I thought that the charter client, the person actually paying all this money, is really treated as a second-class citizen. The main guy the management company is going to focus on is the guy that owns the asset.
Yeah.
And then this poor guy who may be flying $500,000, $1 million a year is second down there. And so I decided I needed to own airplanes. And that's the way I started going. And to be able to do that, I needed to have guaranteed cash flow.
Yep.
So I went at the time to my 4 biggest clients, this is in 1990, and said, look, you fly about this much a year. I'd like you to pay that to me, guarantee that to me in monthly payments so I can make the bank payment on the airplane. And in return, I'm not going to fly other people. I'm going to guarantee you availability. So that is the hallmark still. And by the way, those same 4 clients are still with me.
Oh, really? Wow.
They are, and very proud of that. But it's the same thing that we do now, which is that we give people unparalleled availability. We've never had to go off fleet, even on Christmas, you know, day after Christmas or the 2nd of January, the big days, you know. So we do that by having this closed group that we fly. And it's the client for us, the minimum we state is 100 hours a year to be in our program. It's one number, one price, all inclusive, whether you have 10 steak dinners in Dom Perignon or whether one guy with a fruit tray. It's just one number. There's no all these little petty charges for the overnight fees and the crew fees. And it's all just one number. It makes it really simple for the business managers. And we have people that fly, I think our average person is about 175 per year. We've got people that fly 600 hours a year. There are some salespeople that will say, oh, if you fly over 450 hours a year, you should own a plane. We've run the numbers up to 800 hours a year, and our program still makes sense. And anything you can write off, owning an airplane, you can write off by the payments you make to us in our program as well. So the idea was that we get consistent cash flow, which, you know, we've been through 5 recessions now. And they get this guaranteed availability and seeing the same crew. They're going to see one of a couple of crews, one of a couple of flight attendants, and they have that consistency. They walk up to the airplane, and it's
same
they
product
know them.
every
they
single
know,
time.
you know, their Coke with 1 lemon and no ice is sitting next to the seat that they like to sit at. So it makes it simple and easy. And so that's what our program is. It's called the Priority Program. And then I own a fleet of jets that support the program.
So someone that is flying 100 hours, but then all of a sudden it's like, hey, I need 50 more hours. Is that easy to just say, hey, David, I'm flying more than I expected. Is there any, you know, overage charges, or what's that like to go from, hey, I'm flying 100, like, oh man, maybe I've got a couple business deals, so now I need an extra 50 hours. What's that like?
Got it. I don't anymore, but now that I have a baby, I don't have time, but I belonged to a country club for a while. And I remember I didn't mind the dues. I didn't mind the buy-in. I hated the $17 for the cart. Like, why are you doing that? Don't nickel and dime me. And so we try really hard to make all of these things transparent and fair. So if somebody's in our, let's say our G4SP program and wants to use the G550, it's a straight line trade for what it would have cost him if he was in that program. If somebody wants more hours, there's no penalty. We just up their hours. We're underutilized enough. That's never been a problem. Post-COVID, all my clients called who had not traveled for a while and wanted to double their hours. No problem. We were able to handle it without any issues. So yeah, I think it's about, I don't think that my clients mind that I make money. I just like to be really transparent. This is what I make. I make good money. Everything else is a direct pass-through. Everything else is fair and transparent.
How do you guide clients when they're comparing, call it 100 hours in the priority program versus maybe chartering on demand for 100 hours versus maybe like a fractional with NetJets at 100 hours? What are some of the things you say, all right, here's the things that you should consider?
Got it. When I first started this program, I actually made a little triangle and I put charter, ownership, fractional. And I wrote down under it, what are the advantages? You know, fractional, you call, you say, I want the airplane Thursday, you hang up, you don't need to worry about it, right? Ownership, you know the plane, you get in, all your stuff's there. You know the pilot, you know the flight attendant. Charter, you can be real busy one year, do a bunch of flying, then all of a sudden you're not for a couple of months, and it can come and go. And the pricing is good. The pricing of straight charter is probably the lowest of those three. So I just try to take the advantages of those three and put them together. Now, for some people, let's say somebody is using airplanes all over the world for hops that are one ways. Well, that's going to be that's not going to be my client.
Yep.
He's not right for me. Or somebody who wants to use different size airplanes all the time. Some of that I'll try to not explain, but at least give them the thought of, hey, you've got your S-Class Mercedes or whatever it is. When you put 5 people inside and go to the Dorothy Chandler, it's really efficient. But when you're by yourself to go down to the corner store, you don't take a moped. That's your car. And a Part 91 corporate guy, if he has a Gulfstream and he's going to Europe, he'll take it. But if he's going to Vegas, he'll take it too. So our clients really get the touch and feel of ownership without the risk and the depreciation and all the things that you talked about.
Yeah, I mean, with airplane ownership, I know you mentioned some people are flying that 400 plus hours, and a lot of people say, oh, you should own an airplane. I think one of the big advantages of programs is when you show up to your airplane and you've got a cracked windshield, you're stuck when you have your own airplane. Now you're paying out of pocket versus on a program, oh, something's wrong with this airplane we didn't expect. Actually, we're just going to pull this next Gulfstream right out.
It's not their problem, it's your problem.
Exactly. Yeah. And I think that's a big advantage. I think a lot of people enjoy when they're looking at programs versus airplane ownership.
I agree. Yeah. You have to realize when you own an airplane, however much the management company says they're going to insulate this from you, you are in the airplane business now.
Yeah.
And some people, they want to fly in airplanes, but they don't really want to be in the airplane business. And I do think that it's great to own it. Look, I own airplanes. I love it. So it's great to own an airplane. Don't get me wrong. But you have to understand what you're getting into. And a lot of the management and sales companies are a little deceptive. There's some numbers they leave out. That interior is going to have to be redone every few years. That woodwork every 5 or 10 years is going to have to be redone for another $500,000. How is that all budgeted in? Is that really all taken and amortized into what it's going to cost you to own it? So there's some of these, and the depreciation. I think you got to see what that really can be and what it's been historically over the last 20 years. Those numbers, when you add back in losing $2, $5, $10 million on the airplane when you go and sell it, put that into the hours when you were flying 200 hours a year, all of a sudden, instead of it costing you $6,000 an hour, it was $60,000 an hour. And it's, with ownership, you don't know what it cost you until the end, till you're out. And so with a program like ours, you have that touch and feel of ownership.
That consistency of cost too.
Consistency, you know what it is. You know what it is, and no surprises. And we have a 1 year contract, so it's my contract's 2 pages long, right? I think that some of the fractionals are 60 pages. It's, my lawyer says it's a glorified handshake, but again, we bring in people that we know and that we trust, and we want to give them. I don't want them to be in if they don't want to be in. Fortunately, we haven't had people leave. But we win that business every year. It's a short commitment because of that.
Speaking of airplane budgeting, one thing that I always found interesting, and people have different opinions, and you've owned and operated more airplanes than most people. What are your thoughts when you're owning an airplane on airplane programs? Do you think they're a good investment for nobody, some people, or everybody?
So it's an interesting thing. With me, I don't believe in most of these programs. The engine program, if you were to look at the statistical reliability, so let's say, if your engine, craps out after 2 years, it's free. Well, statistically, that doesn't happen especially with the Rolls-Royce engines. So if they can get, $1,000 an hour, and that engine's going to go for 12,000 hours, you can just do the math of what really, even if you sell it halfway through and you take a depreciation, is that going to be less of a hit or more than you've paid in? And then you have to consider the time value of money. Anybody who's wealthy enough to afford one of these airplanes, they do stuff with their money. So these programs are, I think some chief pilots who don't look too deeply into it like them, because they never have to come have a difficult conversation with the owner. Hey, we got to do your engines this year. I need $4 million. Obviously,
but they would have already paid $5 million if they were on
Correct.
programs, right?
Correct, but they don't need it. It sort of disappears. They don't. It's in the budget, and they don't need to have that difficult conversation because that could always be, oh wow, you know what? I've been thinking about this. We should sell the plane. So some fear creates that. And then for the banks, well, they love it because you're literally investing in a brand new engine with your money, so they can sell it for more. So a lot of the banks require it.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
But it's really it's a very mathematical calculation. That's all.
So as you're operating these airplanes, you've put, all right, here's how much money I am equating to what it'll eventually cost me to do major engine work into all these airplanes, right? And you're holding on to that cash instead of an engine program provider, right?
I'd rather borrow it from myself, yes.
Yeah. Is that something an advantage of, because I know a lot of people, when they're buying airplanes, that's one of the, is it on programs? Right? That's always a big question. And, this airplane's not on programs and it's going to hurt its airplane value. Is that something that you could probably take advantage of in the used airplane space of looking at airplanes that might not be on programs?
Yes. The problem, though, is that most airplanes now are delivered on programs.
Yeah.
So it's difficult to find one that isn't. And once it's on a program, you're paying a premium to buy that airplane, so you wouldn't pull it off the program.
Because it's got money basically banked in that program.
And it's selling for a higher price because it's on a program. Yeah. So I do have some airplanes on programs because that's the way I bought them.
Yeah, because you basically would lose out on that money that's been put into that program before. But when you're looking at it, it's not always making financial sense to keep these airplanes on program, or maybe even after an event, you don't keep it on the program after maybe a major event.
There are some rules against doing that in the contracts. But yeah, I would, if there was an airplane that I was to buy that maybe just had overhauls and was on a program, I might pull it off the program.
How do you think, going back to how people are managing that buying decision, what do you think is the differences between, a program like yours and a fractional program?
Well, fractionals, a lot of it is like that. Was that game where you hide the ball? I think a lot of it is that with money. I've had people in fractionals who I've talked to have said, yeah, but with me, if you drop me off in New York, I'm paying for a round trip, and with them, I'm only paying for the live leg one way. I say, yes, but you're paying double.
Yeah.
So isn't the end result the same?
Yeah.
And not only that, if you do a short trip, you're paying for our deadheads that you're not using. So it's actually. You have to look
Deadhead's been an interesting thing of people used as a big marketing. Oh, no paying for deadheads. That's been a really interesting marketing.
I like fish better, but
anyway, are you? They're just good. Didn't they just play at the Sphere? Everyone uses deadheads. Oh, no deadheads. Like everyone is paying for airplanes to move in position, no matter what the program is, no matter if they're telling you or they're not. These airplanes cost this to move, and everybody is paying that airplane, no matter if they're either inflating a rate or like it's you're paying it. You know what? It reminds me of something that I've got, jet card companies that are like, oh, we've got a great deal. We're going to give you 7 free hours. It's like, there's nothing free in those hours. My biggest question is how can you give 7 free hours on a jet card? The only way is you're losing money, which isn't the case, right? Or they're making so much money on those other hours that they can give away additional hours, right? Why not just say, hey, here's this rate where I can operate this business and this airplane, and it's fair for me and fair for you, instead of trying to gimmick around. And it's kind of like what you said, like hiding that ball, right? Why isn't it just, here's a fair rate that I can operate a business and provide a really great product for you, and this is how I do it.
Do you think maybe it's because people like to fool themselves? Do you think they like to sit at the cocktail party and say, I'm only paying $4,000 an hour for my airplane?
I just don't. It
facilitates that,
and people pay it though. People are doing it, right? Is it just is it a psychological thing that people want a discount or want something back? Is that the idea of it?
I think so. I think it goes back to just sales.
Yeah.
At that point, and maybe I'm not a great salesman. I just say, look, this is the product, and it cost me this amount. Here's my margin, and that's how we do business together. And I think that when you get into these complicated deals, so whether it's in the fractional or whether it's buying one ways, which people do as well, it just starts to get complicated, and it starts to take away. To me, I ask myself, what is private jet flying supposed to be? It's supposed to be convenience. You know, to me, luxury is not gold plating. It's the lack of inconvenience.
Yep.
I walk to the hotel, my key's waiting, the room's ready, the guy grabs me, like everything just flows.
Yep.
And so now people are starting to say, well, but maybe I'll go a day later if I can get this one way and this and that, and I don't know the crew. I'm not sure it's a safe airplane, but I'll get this empty leg. And I don't know if that's the right way and where you actually get. And people, the customer at the end of the day is not an aviation professional. People like you are aviation professionals. And it floors me sometimes that the same guy that if he was going to buy an office building, he'd have his guy.
Yep.
His guy would go check and make sure everything's. But then you have people that know really nothing about it. Maybe their assistant even is calling and booking airplanes. And how are they making those decisions? I mean, it's hard enough for you and I to make those decisions.
Yeah. Yeah.
But they're making decisions on something they don't have expertise in.
That's a great point. Operating airplanes for over 40 years, you've seen the technology change a little bit. What are some of the things that you're really interested and excited to see, some of the new pieces of technology in airplanes and some of the things that are projected to come out over the next few years?
Absolutely. Can I geek out a little bit for a minute?
Yeah, please.
Okay. We just did our whole fleet with Starlink. When I say game changer, that doesn't even get close to what this is.
Yeah.
We have been paying exorbitant amounts of money for really spotty, sluggish Wi-Fi for years.
And the Wi-Fi that used to, or currently in majority of airplanes, is there's two versions, right? There's a ground-based version where they basically have the signal shooting from the ground up, right?
Yep.
Or a kind of old satellite that's like really high orbit satellites, right? Those are kind of, and they're both pretty expensive. The satellite version is very expensive.
Very.
And the ground version is a little less expensive, but it's really only available because the actual equipment is really only in the U.S., right?
Yep.
There's not really those ground signals aren't really anywhere else.
Yes.
Yeah.
And the ground ones, they're kind of slow.
Yep.
It's spotty.
Yeah.
It has issues. The satellite ones, it's a huge satellite, like the size of a school bus. It's
Yep.
geosynchronous, which means
Yep.
it's way up and it's over one point. I think there's 3 of them that cover the whole
There's only
world.
3 that, wow.
And so when you have Ka band, which is the current one that uses that, you have a couple of issues. You have that you only have these few satellites, so there's throughput issues.
Yeah.
But they're also very far away, so you have latency. So to do anything like a video call or anything like that doesn't work very well.
Yep.
And then they charge you. If you were to stream a movie on the way to Europe, it could literally be $20,000 for that movie you just watched. Now with Starlink, we're giving it to our clients for free. Worldwide, I was on board from getting on the airplane, taxiing out, taking off up to altitude and landing. I had 6 people on board. We were all streaming movies. I was FaceTiming somebody at the same time. Somebody else was doing a Zoom call. Flawless. We're getting speeds that are faster than my home fiber.
Wow.
More importantly, stable. Just
Yeah.
stable. They got, I think, 6,500 satellites up now.
Yeah.
And they're close, so there's no
they're
latency.
low orbit, right? Yeah.
It's your phone rings like you were sitting in your house. And this is the biggest change to the way that clients use an airplane that I've ever seen in 40 years. And I'm just blown away with how it works.
Why do you think it's not in why aren't the new airplanes delivering with it?
I'm not sure what's going on with Gulfstream, so I won't speak to that, but they were not early adopters and supporters of it. There are other companies that are coming out with similar. These are low Earth orbit (LEO) satellites, but they don't have as many satellites. So I chose to go with Starlink.
Just like Tesla's and their charging stations, right? It's like they have the infrastructure. If you're gonna invest in that, you might as well invest in one that has the infrastructure, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
We signed one of the first deals with them to equip our entire fleet, which we did, and the clients are just. They literally are contacting me from the airplane, FaceTiming. Can you believe this? So I think that's the biggest, there's so many little tweaks to avionics up front and stuff, which is cool. As a pilot, I love that stuff. Give me a massage chair. It's great.
Yeah.
But that really changes the way somebody can use an airplane.
Yeah. And why haven't airplanes really, there's been no giant leaps forward in airplane, a lot of the technology, right? And I think this is probably one of the first major big steps forward because airplanes, they fly, each airplane flies a little bit longer, maybe a little bit faster, but not really, right? everything has pretty much been the same. This is probably one of the first major technological big jumps forward.
I agree. What the Concorde went twice the speed of sound in the late 1950s.
Yeah.
Where have we gone from there?
Yeah.
So yeah, these are tweaks. Maybe the engines are a little quieter. But a G2, which I think came out in 1968, could go coast to coast.
Yep.
Shoot an instrument approach down to 200.5, go direct to any 2 points on the globe.
Yep.
We're kind of doing the same thing now.
Yeah.
So these are little changes, and I love them, and I love, just like in my car, I love some of the safety features it has now.
Yeah.
But having this connectivity in the cabin now, I tell you, I'm not sure if you had this, but the complaints that we would get on flights were never about my chef's food or the quality of the airplane. It was like, hey, that satellite went down again, and I was supposed to make this call.
Wi-Fi was slow. Yeah, the system, they rebooted it, and
exactly. Yep. Those were the complaints we were getting, and now gone.
Yeah,
and free.
Yeah.
So
and
amazing.
Some of the other complaints we got with Wi-Fi is if the pilots were using it, it would slow everybody in the back because it wasn't, the bandwidth just wasn't there in those systems.
Well, now that's completely gone. And our pilots and flight attendants, we encourage them to communicate with us. So we can say, hey, we're noticing there's only 2 cars pulled out on the ramp, but there's 12 people on the airplane. Can you please ask the flight attendant to ask the clients?
Yep.
And they'll come back. Oh, yeah, they have drivers coming to pick them up. And so there's things that we can do in real time now.
Interesting.
Because
before, what was the messaging service before? I forget what it was called. But it was basically like a text messaging, like Amstat, or not Amstat, but I forget the name. But
I remember back in the day, even
Air
literally
messages,
calling control towers and flight service stations saying, could you radio to my airplane and tell the pilot they want to change the destination?
Yeah.
But this connectivity, which we all assume, right? We all have a cell phone in our pocket now. You assume your kids are going to be in touch 24/7 in 2 seconds. Now you have that in the airplane also.
And you're seeing people really utilize that and like really enjoy it?
Absolutely. And even if you don't utilize it, it's there.
Yeah.
And sometimes maybe you want a little peace and quiet. You want to turn off your phone. Great.
Yeah.
But it's there if you need it.
Yeah.
And yes, people are utilizing it.
Yeah, that's something really different that I've probably seen in the last 3 to 5 years of Wi-Fi starting to be a main question. Everyone's like, yeah, is it Wi-Fi? Yes, it has it. Now it's, okay, what Wi-Fi system does it have? What are the speeds I have? And then I think people don't realize that cost of what it would be internationally. And I think Hawaii is a big one.
Oh, yeah.
Going to Hawaii, what those costs could be, it could take $100,000 charter and add another $30,000, $40,000 just in Wi-Fi.
Dan, we've had it where somebody, was not in Wi-Fi range with their phone. They got on the airplane. The phone sees the Wi-Fi and starts taking all their pictures to the cloud and all their movies. And they're like, we never used it.
Yeah.
And you can go back through and you can see exactly what it was using. That's exactly what it was. Or does something in the background, updates some programs. So, or your kids, without knowing it, left their movie running.
Yeah, or they're just, they're streaming something in the back or music or something. That's crazy. Yeah, I think it's going to be, how difficult is it to get it on airplanes?
We have our own team who installed it. Not difficult. The installation is quite easy.
Yeah.
I think there's a big backlog. Fortunately, we had made an announcement at MBAA and signed up for a bunch of kits right in the beginning because I wanted to do the whole fleet to be the same. But I think some people are telling me it's like end of the year before they can get into
Wow,
one.
That's crazy. Awesome. For clients that want to learn more about TransExec and your program, what's the best way for them to get in contact with you?
Well, transexec.com. Obviously, you can always go there with no dash, but they could always call our number, 818-904-6900. I normally field the calls. We have a very exclusive program. I want to make sure it's a love connection both ways.
Yeah.
And that we can provide something of value. We turn away a lot of business. There's a lot of people where I say, look, you're not right for us.
Yep.
And I strongly believe getting a good broker so that you can navigate the charter world.
Yep.
And one who isn't, like we talked about earlier, who isn't just focused on the price. Because I always say, if you're selling on price, you're not a salesperson. If I walk into you and say, hey, my airplanes are 1/4 of the price of anybody else's, you'll go, okay, but have I sold anything?
Yeah.
No. you're not talking about any of the benefits.
Yep.
And I think having somebody who can wade through that, who knows the industry, knows the gotchas, know when somebody's
Yep.
bullshitting you,
Yep.
is really important.
Or even the airplanes. Hey, I've seen this airplane myself. I've looked at these seats. I've talked to these pilots. This airplane's had issues with parts in the past.
Yep.
It's not reliable, or I don't love the pilots on it. They're going to be kind of assholes, and they're taxi drivers instead of, really trying to be great pilots. I think that experience a lot is missed. And again, if you just go to that price, if that's your driving factor, and you mentioned it of just, all right, it's a little bit more. It's like if you're going to buy a premium product, why are you buying the discounted premium product?
Right.
If you want a premium product and premium service, buy that premium product and premium service. I get it. You don't want to be taken advantage of, what you mentioned earlier. But I think that comes with a trusted advisor, brings you to these, here are the ones that I think fit you the best, and here's why I think you should go with these providers.
I think one of the gotchas that I tell people when they're talking to brokers is if they won't give you a tail number.
Mm-hmm.
Because what they're doing is they'll go out, let's say, and get a quote, for whatever, $80,000 for some trip.
Yep.
And you sign off on that, and they make some percentage. And now they start shopping it around. They find somebody to do it for 70, 60. And hey, if you can make an extra 20 grand once a month,
Yep.
I mean, a lot of these guys are tempted by
Yep.
that.
Yeah.
But the people that want longevity, that really want relationships with their clients, they're transparent about it, and they'll say exactly, or hey, I found a less expensive airplane that I think is even better, and I'm going to pass that discount on to you.
Yeah. Yeah. Or it's, hey, here's this operator in this airplane. This is why I like this operator in this airplane. The good news is a lot of aircraft management companies that have lots of different airplanes and lots of different fleet. Like you mentioned, one airplane's should have been refurbished 10, 15 years ago. And one airplane, the owner is always using it. So yeah, it looks like it's available, but it's really not. And I think that's where a broker should be able to provide value and saying, hey, here's what I would use with this provider and why, and here's maybe an airplane I wouldn't use. That's why sometimes it's not one size doesn't fit all, right?
Absolutely.
Awesome.
I think that, when people look at which aircraft they want to use for a trip, I mean, certainly when you're buying an airplane, I always tell people, you don't drive a Winnebago to work every day because you go camping once a year. Figure out what fits 90% of your mission. And I think when people are going out to look at airplanes, they don't always know. They say, oh, I've got 8 people. Here's an 8-passenger Citation. Let's take it to New York. And somebody who knows the business can come in and say, look, you're not going to be comfortable in it.
Yep.
Yeah, that's a great cabin for an hour.
Yeah.
But you're not going to like it, or you're gonna find these issues on it. And like you said, to find pilots that you feel are safe, that have flown with each other for a long time, been with the company for a while, meet certain standards that we talk about for audits, and that you can find those things that nobody, if they didn't know the industry, couldn't figure out.
Well, last question, and you mentioned it, and it was something I wanted to bring up. What are your thoughts on safety audits and kind of auditing companies? What are some really great things about the safety audits, and what are some things that maybe just kind of more lip service?
The fear I have is that people get a false sense of security. People even do that with pilots. They'll say, oh, well, he's rated by the FAA.
Yeah.
And my dad used to have a joke. What do they call the guy who graduated last in med school? Doctor. So, if you look at audits, if I could look at the audit companies and say, hey, all the accidents that have happened over the last 3-5 years, none of them have been people that have been,
they haven't had the audit, right?
But that's not the case.
Yep.
So that it is a tool. The audits, I think, are interesting, and I think our people like going through them. It's another set of eyes for us internally. But when somebody comes and says, I need to have it, Wyvern, not Argus, or Argus, not Wyvern. We've been through the NetJets audit, which is very intensive. We've been through the Argus and the Wyvern, and they're all good, and they all do different things that are good. But that itself does not mean that airplane is going to be more safe when you walk on board. There are more things to layer on top of that.
What are the safety questions that you think are important for clients to be asking to airplane operators and providers that at least provide maybe a little bit more guidance on getting more comfort about the level of safety that someone operates at?
So I mirror some of the things that I think create safety with us. The low utilization, and also the utilization of the crew. So when our pilots fly one of our clients, they don't fly the day before and they don't fly the day after. So sometimes if you go with a charter, let's say you're flying in the afternoon and all you're doing is LA to Vegas, that crew might have started at 4 a.m. and they've done so. Even though you're only impacting them fatigue-wise with 1 hour, they got 8 hours before that on top of them, and they're tired and banging people in and out. So I like to look at how that crew's been utilized. I like to look at how many times that particular crew's flown with each other.
Interesting. And then that I think the total hours of airplane usage is really interesting too. I think that shows you a lot of things of maybe not just safety, but also maybe quality too.
Absolutely, because you have more time to fix things. When an airplane's flying 120 hours a month, it lands, it's taken off the next morning, they're just trying to throw some parts in, whatever. It's different. And I'm not saying it's unsafe. I'm just saying it's different. And so I think that you need to look at the utilization of the crew, of the airplane. A big thing people talk is YOM, which I still like to say year for some reason. I don't want to go to the YOM. I'm not into acronyms. But that doesn't mean much. And again, the user doesn't necessarily understand that the very first G550 that was delivered to the very last G550 that was delivered over whatever that 20-year span, they're identical. It's not like your BMW that every 2 years has upgrades and differences. By certification, it's really expensive to certify a new aircraft. They're the same. So the year really means almost zero unless you're interpolating that into how it was used and you know, was it run a lot of hours, put away wet, you know, all that stuff. But really more importantly is how it was used, how it was maintained.
The hours on
the hours on it. The year model, it doesn't mean much because also all those parts are changed all the time. So you could have a 2018 that actually has older engines and older parts than a 2004 model.
Well, I think you look at all the NetJet airplanes and the amount of hours those airplanes have. I think it's a good pitch for NetJet saying, hey, we've got all these new airplanes, but a 10-year-old NetJet airplane has got more hours than
a 50-year-old anything else. Yeah, absolutely.
Exactly.
And they're rode hard and put away wet. I mean, that's just the way they run them. They do an amazing job. NetJets has a great safety record, and I think I don't know that I could do what they do. You know, with that many airplanes and that many clients and pilots. My clients aren't drawn to that. They don't want to be client number 7,247. You know, they want to be more of a personalized service. Like my clients wouldn't go to a managed care necessarily. They'd go to their own private doctor. And that's what our service is more akin to.
David, thank you for coming on the Ironbird podcast. I really appreciate you. It was very interesting hearing your take on operating airplanes, how your approach is a little bit different, and all of your insights in buying and managing airplanes.
Dan, it was a pleasure, and look forward to speaking with you again soon.
Thanks so much. Hey, it's Dan again. I want to thank you for watching or listening to the Ironbird podcast. Special thanks go back to David Bilson at TransExec. If you want to get in touch with David, you can always go to his website, transexec.com, no spaces or dashes. Or you can always email us, fly@flyironbird.com, and we can connect you with David. Or if you have any general questions about private aviation, we'd be more than happy to help. Thanks.